The sound of children's laughter turned cruel can break a mother's heart in an instant. Claire Maddox learned this truth on a dust-choked street in Red Haven, watching her 5-year-old daughter crumble under words sharper than any blade. "Your daddy didn't want you. That's why he's dead." But before Claire could move, before rage could overtake her grief, a shadow fell across her child. A cowboy with sun-weathered hands and eyes like storm clouds knelt in the dirt beside Rosie. What he said next would change 3 lives forever. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The wagon wheels creaked their final revolution as Claire Maddox pulled the tired horses to a stop on the outskirts of Red Haven, Montana territory. Dust devils danced across the main street, carrying with them the scent of horse manure, wood smoke, and something else. Something that smelled like possibility, or perhaps desperation. She couldn't quite tell the difference anymore. Beside her on the worn wooden seat, 5-year-old Rosie pressed her face against Claire's arm, her small body trembling despite the afternoon heat. The child hadn't spoken since they'd crossed the territorial line 3 days ago, communicating only through those huge brown eyes that seemed to hold far too much sorrow for someone who'd barely begun to live. "We're here, sweetheart," Claire whispered, pressing her lips to Rosie's dark curls. The little girl smelled of road dust and the lavender soap Claire had managed to save from their old life, back when they'd had a home, back when Richard had been alive, back when the world made sense. But the world didn't make sense anymore. It hadn't since the fever took Richard 8 months ago, leaving Claire with a 5-year-old daughter, $17 in coins, and the address of a distant cousin in Montana who'd promised her a teaching position in a letter that now felt ancient. Claire climbed down from the wagon, her legs protesting the movement after days of traveling. Her black morning dress, the only decent dress she owned, was coated in a fine layer of trail dust that made her look like a ghost. Perhaps that's what she was. The ghost of the woman who'd once believed in happily ever after. She reached up for Rosie, lifting her daughter down with careful hands. The child's arms locked around Claire's neck with desperate strength. "Mama, I'm scared," Rosie finally whispered, her breath hot against Claire's ear. "I know, baby. I know." Claire's eyes stung, but she blinked back the tears. She'd cried enough. Now was the time for strength, for rebuilding, for somehow creating a life out of the ashes of the one they'd lost. "But we're going to be brave, remember? You and me together, we're going to make a new home here." Red Haven wasn't much to look at. A single main street lined with weathered wooden buildings that had seen better days. The general store dominated one corner, its false front painted with fading letters advertising provisions and supplies. Across the street, a saloon called the Lucky Horseshoe already echoed with the sounds of afternoon drinking. A church steeple rose at the far end of town, white paint peeling in the harsh Montana sun. But there were gardens. Claire noticed them immediately, small patches of determined green defying the harsh landscape. Where there were gardens, there were women. Where there were women, there might be kindness. Or at least, that's what Claire hoped. She tied the horses to the hitching post outside the general store and took Rosie's hand. "We need to get some supplies before we find Cousin Margaret's place. Can you be a big girl and help Mama?" Rosie nodded, but her grip on Claire's hand tightened. The bell above the door jangled as they entered, and the dim interior offered blessed relief from the sun's glare. The store smelled of coffee, tobacco, and sawdust. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from canned goods to bolts of fabric. A pot-bellied stove dominated the center of the room, unlit in the summer heat, but clearly the heart of the establishment during winter months. Behind the counter, a woman with iron-gray hair looked up from her ledger. Her sharp eyes took in Claire's morning dress, Rosie's too thin frame, and the desperation Claire tried so hard to hide. "Help you?" the woman asked, her voice neither warm nor cold, just practical. "Yes, please, I need—" Claire paused, calculating the precious coins in her reticule. "Flour, if you have it, and some salt pork, maybe some beans." "You the new teacher?" The woman set down her pencil, studying Claire with increased interest. Hope flickered in Claire's chest. "Yes, Claire Maddox. I'm looking for Margaret Sutton. She's my cousin." She arranged the position. Something shifted in the woman's expression. Not quite pity, but close enough to make Claire's spine stiffen. "Margaret passed 3 weeks ago. Influenza swept through town in June. Took 6 people with it. The words hit Claire like a physical blow. She felt the room tilt, felt Rosie's hand slip from her grasp as her vision tunneled. 3 weeks. They'd traveled all this way, spent their last dollars on supplies for the journey, and Margaret had been dead for 3 weeks. Mama? Rosie's voice cut through the roaring in Claire's ears. Claire forced herself to breathe, to focus. She couldn't fall apart. Not here. Not now. I see. Thank you for telling me. Her voice sounded strange, distant. Is the teaching position still available? The woman's face softened slightly. That's town council business. But seeing as you've come all this way, I'm Susan Hartley. My husband's on the council. School doesn't start for another month, but we do need a teacher. Previous one married a rancher and moved out to his spread. I'm qualified, Claire said quickly. I taught in St. Louis for 2 years before my marriage. I have references. We'll need more than references out here, Susan interrupted, but not unkindly. The job comes with a room at the schoolhouse. Small, but it's got a stove and a bed. Pays not much, but it's steady. You'd need to prove yourself to the council, though. They meet Friday. Friday, 3 days away. Claire had $17. Maybe less after she bought supplies. I understand. Where might I find lodging until then? Susan pursed her lips, considering. Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house on Oak Street. Clean rooms, decent rates, or there's... The bell above the door jangled violently as 3 boys tumbled into the store, laughing and shoving each other. They looked to be around 8 or 9 years old, dressed in dusty clothes that marked them as ranch kids. The tallest one, a freckled boy with red hair, stopped short when he spotted Rosie hiding behind Claire's skirts. Who are you? He demanded, his tone more curious than hostile. Before Claire could answer, Rosie stepped out slightly, her chin lifting with a bravery that made Claire's heart ache. I'm Rosie. You knew? The red-haired boy asked. Yes, we just arrived. Where's your pa? Another boy asked, this one stocky with a gap-toothed grin. Rosie's face crumpled slightly. He died. The words hung in the air for a moment. Claire moved to pull Rosie back, to protect her from whatever was coming, but she was too slow. So you ain't got no father? The third boy, smaller, with mean eyes, piped up. My ma says girls without fathers are cursed, says their ma's probably did something bad and God punished them. That's enough, Susan snapped from behind the counter, but the damage was done. Is that why your pa died? The red-haired boy pressed, emboldened by his friend's cruelty. Did your ma do something bad? No, Rosie's voice cracked. My mama's good. My papa was good. Then why ain't he here? The mean-eyed boy taunted. My pa says only weak men die and leave their families. Guess your pa was weak. Stop it! Rosie's voice rose to a near shriek, tears streaming down her face. You're mean! You're all mean! Claire finally found her voice, her hands shaking with rage as she reached for her daughter. How dare you speak to her that way? She's a child who's lost her father. Have you no decency? But the boys just laughed, the sound high and cruel, the way only children's laughter can be when they've found a target for their thoughtless viciousness. Rosie's got no papa! Rosie's got no papa! They chanted, dancing around as Rosie sobbed. Get out! Susan shouted, coming around the counter. You boys get out of my store right now, or I'll tell your mothers what you've done. But they were already backing toward the door, still laughing. The red-haired boy turned back just before leaving. Guess nobody wanted you, Rosie. That's why you're here all alone. The door slammed behind them, but their laughter echoed from the street. Rosie collapsed against Claire, her small body racked with sobs. Claire knelt in the sawdust, gathering her daughter into her arms, her own tears finally breaking free. 8 months of holding strong, of being the steady one, of swallowing her grief so Rosie wouldn't see. It all crumbled in the face of her child's pain. Hush, baby, hush now. They're just cruel, ignorant boys. They don't know anything about us, about your papa. But Mama, Rosie wailed, her face pressed against Claire's shoulder. Papa's really gone. He's really not coming back. And now we don't have a home, and those boys said, they were wrong, Claire said fiercely, pulling back to cup Rosie's tear-stained face in her hands. Your papa loved you more than anything in this world. He didn't want to leave us. Sometimes God takes people we love, and it's not fair and it's not a punishment. It just happens. But even as she said the words, Claire wondered if she believed them herself. Some nights, in the darkness of whatever barn or way station they'd sheltered in, she'd wondered if this was punishment. If Richard had died because she'd been too proud, too stubborn, too something. Susan appeared beside them with a handkerchief. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Maddox. Those boys should know better. I'll speak to their mothers." Claire took the handkerchief, wiping Rosie's face with gentle hands. "Thank you, but I suspect it won't change anything. Children can be cruel." "Some adults, too," Susan muttered, then seemed to catch herself. "Look, about that room at the schoolhouse. I can't make it official until the council meets, but I don't see why you couldn't stay there starting tonight. Keys hanging in the town office. I'll send my boy to show you the way after you've had a chance to settle." It was more kindness than Claire had expected, and it threatened to undo her completely. "That's very generous, Mrs. Hartley." "Susan, and it's just practical. Can't have you spending money on lodging when the room's sitting empty." But there was warmth in her eyes that belied the practical words. Claire managed a shaky smile and turned back to Rosie, who had quieted to hiccuping sniffles. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get our supplies and—" The door opened again, the bells jangle making them all tense. Claire instinctively pulled Rosie closer, prepared to face those boys again if necessary. But it wasn't the boys. The man who entered had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that came from years of hard work rather than any softness. His clothes marked him as a rancher: worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned dark by the sun, and a black hat that had seen better days. His face was weathered, probably putting him somewhere in his early 30s, with the kind of lines around his eyes that came from squinting against harsh sun and harsher winds. But it was his eyes that caught Claire's attention, a startling gray blue, like storm clouds over mountains. They swept the store, taking in the scene: Susan's protective stance, Claire kneeling in the sawdust with her sobbing child, the handkerchief clutched in her hand. "Susan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I need—" He stopped, his gaze settling on Rosie. "What happened?" "Some boys being cruel, Cole," Susan said, her tone sharp. "Nothing that concerns you." But Cole, if that was his name, didn't move toward the counter. Instead, he stood there, his eyes still on Rosie, and something in his expression shifted. It wasn't pity, exactly. It was something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. Then, without a word, he crossed the store with measured steps and did something that would later be recounted in parlors and over Sunday dinners for months to come. He knelt in the sawdust beside them. Not in front of Claire. That would have been presumptuous. Not hovering over them. That would have been intimidating. But beside them, lowering himself to Rosie's level with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice pitched just for Rosie. "I'm Cole. What's your name?" Rosie peeked out from Claire's embrace, her eyes red and swollen. Rosie. That's a pretty name. Like a flower." Cole reached up and removed his hat, holding it in his large hands. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar. "I heard those boys saying some mean things to you." Rosie's lower lip trembled. "They said I don't have a papa. They said—" She couldn't finish, dissolving into fresh tears. Cole's jaw tightened, but when he spoke again, his voice remained gentle. "Well, I don't know who those boys think they are, but they're wrong about something important." "What?" Rosie whispered. "They said you're alone." Cole glanced up at Claire, and she saw a question in his eyes. Permission, maybe, or just acknowledgement that he was overstepping. But there was something so genuine in his expression that Claire found herself nodding slightly. Cole turned back to Rosie. "You're not alone. You've got your mama, who I can tell loves you more than anything in this world. And now you're in Red Haven, which means you've got a whole town of people who are going to watch out for you. But those boys were being bullies. And you know what I've learned in my 32 years? Cole's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. Bullies are usually just scared kids who don't know how to be brave. They pick on others because it makes them feel bigger. But you're already braver than they'll ever be. How? Rosie asked, her voice small but curious. Because you and your mama traveled all the way here, to a new place to start over. That takes real courage, the kind those boys don't have. Cole shifted slightly, and Claire noticed his knees must be aching from kneeling on the hard floor, but he didn't move to rise. And I'll tell you something else, Rosie. You may not have your papa with you anymore, but that doesn't mean you don't have anyone. It doesn't? No. Cole's voice dropped even lower, and Claire had to strain to hear him. Because starting right now, you've got me. I know I'm just some stranger who walked into a store, but I'm making you a promise. You'll never face those boys alone again. You need someone to walk with you, someone to make sure nobody's being cruel. You've got that now. Really? Rosie's eyes were wide, shimmering with tears, but also something else. Hope, fragile and new. Really? Cole finally stood, his knees cracking slightly with the movement, but his gaze remained on Rosie. Then he looked at Claire, and she saw uncertainty flicker across his face for the first time. If that's all right with your mama, of course. I don't mean to presume. It's very kind of you, Mr. Claire's voice came out rougher than she intended, thick with emotion she couldn't quite name. Archer. Cole Archer. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of town. He twisted his hat in his hands, suddenly looking uncomfortable. I'm not trying to interfere, Mrs. Maddox, Claire Maddox. She rose to her feet, keeping one hand on Rosie's shoulder. And I appreciate your kindness to my daughter. It's been a difficult day, a difficult few months, really. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding that needed no words. Cole Archer had the eyes of someone who knew what loss looked like, who recognized grief even when it tried to hide behind practical concerns and stiff spines. Well, Mrs. Maddox, he said, settling his hat back on his head. Welcome to Red Haven. I hope those boys didn't give you the wrong impression of this town. Most folks here are decent people. Susan's already been very kind, Claire said, managing a small smile. We're just finding our footing. Cole nodded, then looked down at Rosie again. You remember what I said, all right? You're not alone. Rosie nodded, scrubbing at her eyes with the back of her hand. Thank you, Mr. Cole. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile, though it looked out of practice. Just Cole is fine. He tipped his hat to Claire and turned to leave, but Susan called out to him. Cole Archer, you came in here for a reason. Don't tell me you forgot already. Cole paused, looking slightly sheepish. Right. Hell, I don't even remember now. I'll come back tomorrow. He was out the door before Susan could respond, leaving Claire standing in the middle of the general store with sawdust on her knees and a daughter who had finally stopped crying. Well, Susan said, breaking the silence that had settled over them. That's Cole Archer for you. He seems kind, Claire ventured, not sure what else to say about the strange encounter. He is. Susan moved back behind the counter, pulling out her ledger again. Lost his own family years back. Wife and unborn child. Influenza, same as took my Margaret. He's been quiet ever since, keeps to himself mostly. Works his ranch, comes to town for supplies, but doesn't socialize much. She paused, looking up at Claire with an expression that was hard to read. In all the years since, I've never seen him speak to a child like that. Never seen him kneel down and make promises to a little girl he doesn't know. Claire's throat tightened. I see. Do you? Susan's eyes were shrewd. Cole Archer is the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. He's got land, money, and good looks to boot. Half the unmarried women in Montana Territory have set their sights on him at one time or another. He doesn't give any of them the time of day. I'm not, Claire started, but Susan held up a hand. I'm not saying you are. I'm just telling you so you understand what just happened in my store. Cole Archer doesn't make promises lightly. If he told your daughter she's not alone, he meant it. Which means you've just been adopted by the most stubborn, loyal man in Red Haven. Claire looked down at Rosie, who was still sniffling but no longer crying. The child looked up at her with those big brown eyes. Mama, I like him. Is he going to be our friend? I don't know, sweetheart, Claire said honestly, but he seems like a good man. He knelt down, Rosie said, as if this explained everything. Papa used to kneel down too, so he could look at me. The words pierced Claire's heart. Richard had always done that, gotten down to Rosie's level when he spoke to her, never talked down to her from his adult height. It was one of the 1,000 small things that made him a good father, and seeing a stranger do the same thing brought back a wave of grief so powerful it nearly knocked Claire off her feet. "Yes," she managed. "He did." Susan cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Let's get you those supplies, shall we? And I'll have my boy Tom show you to the schoolhouse after. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and the roof doesn't leak much." They spent the next half hour gathering supplies: flour, beans, salt pork, a little bit of coffee that Susan threw in for free, seeing as you've had a hard day. Claire didn't argue, too exhausted and overwhelmed to fight about kindness. By the time they stepped back out onto the dusty street, the sun had moved lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Tom Hartley, a gangly boy of about 14, waited with their wagon, having already loaded their supplies. "Ma says I'm to show you to the schoolhouse," he announced, then climbed up onto the seat beside Claire without waiting for a response. The schoolhouse sat at the eastern edge of town, a modest wooden building with a pitched roof and a small bell tower. Behind it, connected by a short covered walkway, was an even smaller structure, the teachers' quarters. It was, as Susan had warned, nothing fancy. A single room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a stove. But it had windows that let in light, a door that locked, and most importantly, it was theirs. "School starts first Monday in September," Tom said, hovering in the doorway as Claire and Rosie surveyed their new home. "Ma says you'll need to meet with the council on Friday to make it official, but she figures they'll approve you. We haven't had applications from anyone else, and the kids need teaching." "Thank you, Tom. Please thank your mother again for us." The boy nodded and disappeared, leaving Claire and Rosie alone in the tiny room that was now their entire world. Rosie moved to the window, pressing her hands against the glass. "Mama, look! You can see the mountains from here." Claire joined her, wrapping her arms around her daughter from behind. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic against the darkening sky. They were beautiful and terrible, a reminder of how far they were from everything they'd known, how completely their lives had changed. "Yes, baby, we can see the mountains." "Do you think Papa can see them too, from heaven?" Claire's eyes burned. "I think your Papa can see everything, and I think he's watching over us, making sure we're safe." "Like Mr. Cole?" The question caught Claire off guard. "What do you mean?" Rosie turned in her arms, her small face serious. "Mr. Cole said we weren't alone, that he'd watch out for us. Maybe Papa sent him." It was the kind of magical thinking only a 5-year-old could manage, the belief that her dead father could somehow send a stranger to protect them. Claire should correct it, should gently explain that's not how the world worked. But looking into her daughter's eyes, still red from crying but now holding a glimmer of comfort, Claire couldn't bring herself to shatter that small hope. "Maybe he did, sweetheart. Maybe he did." They spent the evening unpacking their meager belongings and making the small room as homelike as possible. Claire hung the curtains she'd brought from their old life, a small luxury, but one she couldn't bear to leave behind. Rosie arranged her few toys on the windowsill: a rag doll that had been her mother's, a wooden horse Richard had carved, and a smooth river stone she'd found on their journey and declared her lucky rock. As darkness fell, Claire lit the lamp and made a simple dinner of beans and salt pork. They ate at the small table, exhaustion making even chewing feel like work. "Mama?" Rosie said around a mouthful of beans. "Do you think those boys will be mean again?" Claire set down her fork, considering her words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people are kind and some people are cruel. But you know what your papa always said about bullies? That they're more scared than the people they pick on?" "That's right." Claire reached across the table to touch Rosie's cheek. "And you were so brave today. Even when they were being mean, you stood up for yourself. You told them your papa was good. That took courage. But then I cried. Crying isn't weakness, Rosie. Crying is just feeling things deeply. And there's nothing wrong with feeling things." Claire paused. "Though I'll admit, I was about ready to take a switch to those boys myself." Rosie giggled, the first real laugh Claire had heard from her in days, and the sound was like medicine. After dinner, Claire helped Rosie into her nightgown and tucked her into the bed they'd be sharing. The child's eyes were already drooping with exhaustion. Mama? Yes, baby? I'm glad Mr. Cole was there today. Even though those boys were mean, he made it better. Claire brushed Rosie's hair back from her forehead, pressing a kiss there. Me too, sweetheart. Sleep now. But as Rosie drifted off, Claire found herself unable to settle. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkened town. A few lights still glowed in windows, families settling in for the night, lives continuing in their normal patterns. She thought about Cole Archer kneeling in the sawdust, speaking to her daughter with such gentleness, the way his eyes had held both strength and sorrow, the promise he'd made so easily, as if vowing to protect a stranger's child was the most natural thing in the world. Lost his own family, Susan had said. Wife and unborn child. Claire understood that loss in a way she wished she didn't. The way grief carved holes in you that never quite filled in, just became part of your landscape. The way you learned to walk around them, to function despite them, but they never truly healed. What would make a man who'd lost everything reach out to protect someone else's child? Was it kindness, loneliness, or was Rosie right in her childish way? Was this somehow the universe's attempt at balance, putting broken people in each other's paths so they might help each other survive? Claire didn't know. But as she finally climbed into bed beside her sleeping daughter, pulling Rosie close and listening to the soft sound of her breathing, she allowed herself a small measure of gratitude. They'd arrived in Red Haven with nothing but desperation and $17. They'd been met with cruelty from children and the death of their only contact, but they'd also found a roof over their heads, a job possibility, and the promise of a stranger who'd knelt in the dirt and told her daughter she wasn't alone. It wasn't much, but right now, exhausted and grief-worn and terrified of what tomorrow would bring, it was enough. Outside, the Montana night settled over Red Haven, bringing with it the promise of another day. Another chance. Another small step forward in building a life from ruins. And somewhere on a ranch 5 miles north, a man named Cole Archer lay awake, thinking about a little girl with tear-stained cheeks and a mother with eyes that held the same grief he saw in his mirror every morning. He'd made a promise today. Cole Archer didn't make promises lightly, which meant his quiet, solitary life had just become infinitely more complicated. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, Cole discovered he didn't mind as much as he should. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, painting stripes of gold across the wooden floor. Claire woke to the sound of birdsong and, for one disoriented moment, forgot where she was. Then Rosie stirred beside her, and reality came flooding back. Red Haven, the schoolhouse, the cruel boys, and a stranger's unexpected kindness. She rose quietly, letting Rosie sleep a while longer. The stove needed stoking, and there was coffee to make. Simple tasks, the kind that kept grief at bay if you focused on them hard enough. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Cole Archer, the way he'd moved across that store with such purpose, the ease with which he'd lowered himself to Rosie's level, as if comforting frightened children was something he did every day. But Susan's words haunted her. In all the years since, I've never seen him speak to a child like that. Claire poured water into the kettle, her hands steady despite the confusion churning inside her. She couldn't afford distractions. Not romantic notions about handsome cowboys, not hopes for anything beyond survival. She had a daughter to raise, a teaching position to secure, and a life to rebuild from nothing. The coffee was just beginning to boil when a knock sounded at the door. Claire's heart jumped. It was barely past dawn. Who would be calling at this hour? She smoothed her hair, suddenly conscious that she was still in her nightdress with only a shawl thrown over her shoulders, and cracked the door open. Cole Archer stood on the small porch, hat in hand. He looked like he'd been up for hours already. His clothes were fresh but dusty, and there was a smudge of dirt on his jaw that suggested morning chores. "Mr. Archer," Claire said, her voice coming out more breathless than she intended. "It's quite early." "I know. I apologize." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to catch you before... Well, I brought something." He gestured to the porch, where Claire now noticed a wooden crate sitting by the door. "Thought you might could use some supplies. Fresh eggs, some vegetables from my garden, a bit of butter. Ranch always produces more than I can use." Claire stared at the crate, then back at Cole. "That's very generous, but I can't accept..." "It's not charity," Cole interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "It's neighbors helping neighbors. Susan mentioned you'd be meeting with the council Friday, that you didn't have much to tide you over till then. This is just how folks do things out here. Mama? Rosie's voice drifted from inside. Who's there? Before Claire could answer, Rosie appeared at her side, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Then she saw Cole and her face transformed, breaking into the first genuine smile Claire had seen in weeks. Mr. Cole, you came back! Cole's expression softened in a way that made Claire's chest ache. Morning, Rosie. I brought you and your mama some things from my ranch. You like eggs? I love eggs. Mama makes them scrambled with butter, and they're my favorite thing in the whole world. Well then, you're in luck. Cole knelt down. There it was again, that automatic lowering to a child's level, and met Rosie's eyes. I've got 6 fresh eggs in there, laid just this morning, plus some carrots and potatoes. Even got a bit of honey if you like sweet things. Rosie's eyes went wide. Real honey? From bees? From my own hives. You ever taste honey straight from the comb? Rosie shook her head, mesmerized. Then you're in for a treat. Cole stood, finally looking back at Claire. I should get going. Just wanted to drop these off before heading back to the ranch. Wait, Claire said, the word escaping before she could think better of it. I've just made coffee. It's the least I can offer after your kindness. Something flickered in Cole's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. I wouldn't want to impose. You're not imposing. You brought us food when we had very little. Please, let me give you coffee in return. Cole hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right. Thank you. Claire ushered him inside, suddenly acutely aware of how small the space was, how his presence seemed to fill it. She busied herself with cups while Rosie chattered at Cole, showing him her lucky rock and wooden horse. My papa made this, Rosie said, holding up the carved horse. He was real good at making things. He made Mama a jewelry box too, but we had to leave it behind because the wagon was too small. Cole took the horse, examining it with genuine interest. This is fine work. Your papa had skilled hands. He was a carpenter, Claire said, setting the coffee cups on the table. In St. Louis. He built furniture mostly, but he liked to carve small things for Rosie in the evenings. Cole handed the horse back to Rosie with careful reverence. A man who takes time to carve toys for his daughter is a good man. You should be proud of your papa, Rosie. I am. Rosie clutched the horse to her chest, even though those boys said he was weak for dying. Cole's jaw tightened, and Claire saw anger flash across his face before he controlled it. Those boys were wrong. It doesn't take strength to say cruel things to a little girl. It takes strength to keep going after loss. Your papa would be proud of how brave you and your mama have been. Claire's hands trembled as she poured the coffee. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected Cole Archer to show up at dawn, hadn't expected him to speak to Rosie with such gentle certainty, hadn't expected the way his words could lance the wound of grief just enough to let some of the poison out. Sugar? She asked, her voice rough. Black's fine. Thank you. They sat at the small table while Rosie played on the floor with her toys. The coffee was too hot to drink yet, but Claire wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for something to do with them. Susan told me about Margaret Sutton, Cole said quietly. I'm sorry for your loss, and sorry you traveled all this way to find that door closed. Life rarely goes as planned, Claire said, the words coming out more bitter than she intended. We learn to adapt. That we do? Cole's eyes held understanding that came from experience rather than platitude. Still doesn't make it easy. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by Rosie's soft humming as she played. It should have been awkward, sharing coffee with a stranger in her nightdress and shawl in this tiny room that held all their worldly possessions. But somehow it wasn't. Can I ask you something? Claire finally said. Why did you really come here this morning? And please don't say it's just how neighbors do things out here. Cole took a long drink of his coffee, considering his words. When he spoke, his voice was honest in a way that surprised her. Because I made a promise to your daughter yesterday. I told her she wasn't alone, that she'd never have to face those boys by herself. And I meant it. He paused. I know what it's like to be alone, Mrs. Maddox, to lose everything and have to figure out how to keep breathing when every part of you wants to stop. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not a child. Susan told me about your wife. I'm sorry. Sarah. Cole said the name like it still hurt, even after all these years. She died 5 years ago, along with our baby. I was away checking fence lines when the fever hit. By the time I got home, he stopped, his hands tightening around the cup. Well, it doesn't matter now. It does matter, Claire said softly. Grief always matters. Just because time passes doesn't mean the loss becomes less real. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Claire felt something shift. It was recognition, she realized, the kind that only comes when one grieving person truly sees another. Your husband, Cole said. How long? 8 months? Fever took him too, along with half our neighborhood. I tried to save him, sat by his bed for days, forcing water and medicine down his throat. But nothing worked. Claire's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The worst part was telling Rosie. She kept asking when Papa would wake up, and I had to explain that he wouldn't, that he was gone forever. That's a heavy burden to carry alone. I didn't have much choice. Richard's parents had passed years before, and my family— Claire shook her head. Let's just say they didn't approve of my marriage to a carpenter. They cut me off when I refused to marry the banker they'd chosen. So when Richard died, I had no one. Margaret was my only option, and now you're here, Cole finished. In a strange town with a 5-year-old and $17 to your name. Claire's head snapped up. How did you— Susan mentioned you were counting coins carefully when buying supplies, and I've been around enough to know what desperation looks like. Cole held up a hand before she could protest. I'm not judging, I'm just saying I understand why you can't afford pride right now. Is that what the food was about? Charity for the desperate widow? No. Cole's voice was firm. It's about making sure a woman and child don't go hungry when I've got more than I need. There's a difference between charity and community, Mrs. Maddox. Out here, we take care of our own. And whether you've been here 1 day or 20 years, you're part of Red Haven now. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the pride that was all she had left. But looking at her daughter playing on the floor, at the crate of food that would stretch their meager supplies, at this man who had no reason to care about them except basic human decency, she couldn't. Thank you, she said instead. Truly, your kindness means more than you know. Cole nodded, draining the last of his coffee and standing. I should get back. Ranch doesn't run itself. He paused at the door, then turned back. The town social is next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just folks gathering in the church hall, some music and dancing, food. You and Rosie should come. Good way to meet people. I don't know if— Those boys will be there, Cole said, his eyes serious. And their parents. Good opportunity to show them that Rosie isn't someone they can push around, that she's got people who care about her. Claire understood what he was really saying, that his presence would send a message, that Cole Archer watching out for them meant something in this town. All right, she agreed. We'll come. Cole's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Good. I'll look for you there. He tipped his hat to Rosie. You take care, little one. And remember what I said, you're not alone. After he left, Claire stood at the door, watching him climb onto a beautiful bay horse and ride toward the edge of town. Rosie appeared at her side, pressing against her leg. I like him, Mama. He's nice like Papa was. The words were innocent, but they struck Claire like a physical blow. Because Rosie was right. There was something about Cole Archer that reminded her of Richard, not in looks or manner, but in the quiet steadiness, the way he listened more than he talked, the gentleness that masked an iron core of strength, and that terrified her. Because Claire had learned the hard way that letting yourself depend on someone, letting yourself care about them, just gave fate another way to hurt you. Richard had been strong and healthy, and he'd still died, leaving her shattered and alone. What made her think anything different would happen with anyone else? Come on, sweetheart, she said, pulling Rosie back inside. Let's make those eggs Mr. Cole brought us. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Claire cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, reviewing the curriculum she'd brought from St. Louis and adapting it for a frontier classroom. She met with Susan twice more, learning the rhythms of the town, the families she'd be teaching, the expectations the council would have. Rosie spent her days exploring their small yard, collecting rocks and wildflowers, slowly emerging from the shell of grief she'd wrapped around herself. Claire watched her daughter's transformation with cautious hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe they really could build a life here. Friday arrived with Claire's nerves stretched taut. The council meeting was at 2 o'clock, in the church hall. Susan had assured her it was mostly a formality, but Claire knew better than to assume anything. She dressed in her best morning dress, or rather, her only dress that wasn't covered in trail dust, and braided her hair in a neat crown. Rosie wore her Sunday dress, carefully preserved through their journey, and looked like a miniature lady. "Do I have to come, Mama?" Rosie asked as they walked toward the church. "Yes, sweetheart. The council needs to meet both of us, since we'll be living at the schoolhouse." The church hall was a simple room with wooden benches and a raised platform at one end. 5 men sat at a table on the platform, older men, weathered by years of frontier life, their faces giving nothing away. Claire's stomach clenched. This was it, the moment that would determine whether they had a future here or would be back on the road with nowhere to go. "Mrs. Maddox, the man in the center said, his voice formal. "I'm James Patterson, head of the town council. Please, have a seat." Claire sat, pulling Rosie onto her lap despite the child's protest that she was too big. She needed the comfort of her daughter's weight, the reminder of why she had to succeed. "We've reviewed your teaching credentials," Patterson continued. "Very impressive. 2 years in St. Louis, references from the headmaster, experience with children of various ages." "Thank you, sir." "However," the word fell like a stone, "we have some concerns." Claire's heart sank. "What concerns?" "You're a widow, Mrs. Maddox. Young, alone, with a small child. Teaching is demanding work, especially in a frontier town where resources are limited. We worry whether you'll be able to manage both the classroom and your personal responsibilities." It was the polite version of what Claire had heard before, that a woman alone couldn't possibly be capable, that she needed a man to make her legitimate. "With respect, Councilman Patterson, I've been managing both teaching and motherhood for 2 years. In St. Louis, I taught a classroom of 35 students while caring for my daughter and maintaining a household. I assure you I'm more than capable." "Perhaps in St. Louis, where you had the support of a husband and community." This from another councilman, a thin man with suspicious eyes. "Out here, things are different. Harder. We need someone who can commit to the long term, not someone who'll marry and move away within a year." The implication was clear. They thought she was looking for a husband, that teaching was just a stopgap until she could find another man to take care of her. Claire's spine stiffened. "I have no intention of marrying, gentlemen. My husband's death is too recent, and my focus is entirely on providing for my daughter and serving this community. You have my word that I will fulfill my commitment to Red Haven's children for as long as you'll have me." The councilmen exchanged glances. Claire felt her chances slipping away, felt the future she desperately tried to build crumbling before it even began. Then the door opened. Cole Archer walked in, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He removed his hat, nodding to the council. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption." "Mr. Archer," Patterson said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is a closed council meeting." "I know, but I heard you were meeting with Mrs. Maddox about the teaching position, and I wanted to offer my perspective." Cole's voice was respectful but firm. "As a landowner and taxpayer in this community." The councilman shifted uncomfortably. Cole Archer's ranch was one of the largest in the territory, his taxes a significant portion of the town's revenue. His opinion carried weight whether they liked it or not. "Very well," Patterson said slowly. "What's your perspective, Mr. Archer?" Cole moved to stand beside Claire's chair, not touching but close enough that his presence felt like support. "I think Mrs. Maddox is exactly what this town needs. She's educated, experienced, and desperate enough to stay when easier opportunities might tempt her elsewhere. That's not a weakness, gentlemen. That's an asset." "But her circumstances," the thin councilman began. "Her circumstances make her strong," Cole interrupted. "She's traveled across the territory alone with a child, faced the death of her only contact here, and is still standing in front of you asking for a chance to prove herself. That takes courage and determination. Those are the qualities I'd want in someone teaching my children." He paused. "If I had any." The room fell silent. Everyone knew Cole's story, knew about Sarah and the baby. For him to invoke that loss in defense of a stranger spoke volumes. "Furthermore," Cole continued, "Mrs. Maddox needs this position, which means she'll fight for it. She'll work harder than anyone you could hire from the East who sees this as an adventure. She understands what's at stake, and in my experience, people who have something to lose are the ones you can count on. Patterson studied Cole for a long moment, then looked back at Claire. Mrs. Maddox, can you start the week after next? School opens the first Monday of September. Relief flooded through Claire so powerfully she felt dizzy. Yes, absolutely. The salary is $15 a month, plus use of the schoolhouse quarters. You'll teach students ages 6 through 14 5 days a week, expected to attend church on Sundays and maintain a respectable reputation in the community. I understand. Thank you, Councilman Patterson. Thank you all. The councilman nodded, already moving on to other business. Cole offered his arm to Claire, helping her stand on shaky legs. They walked out together, Rosie between them, into the afternoon sunshine. You didn't have to do that, Claire said once they were out of earshot. Speak for me like that. I know. Cole settled his hat back on his head. But those old men needed reminding that strength comes in different forms. They were so busy worrying about you being a woman alone that they couldn't see what was right in front of them, someone willing to work hard because she has to. Still, you invoked your own loss to defend me. That couldn't have been easy. Cole's expression clouded briefly. No, but it was true. And sometimes truth is more important than comfort. Rosie tugged on Cole's hand. Mr. Cole, does this mean we get to stay? That I can go to school here? Cole knelt down, that gesture again, so natural it seemed unconscious. Yes, Rosie, you get to stay. Your mama's going to be the teacher, which means you'll learn all sorts of things, reading and writing and arithmetic. Will you visit us still? Now that we're staying? The question hung in the air between them. Cole glanced up at Claire, something uncertain in his eyes. If your mama says it's all right. All of Claire's careful walls, all her determination to stay independent and unattached, crumbled under the weight of her daughter's hopeful expression and this man's unwavering kindness. Of course it's all right, she heard herself say. You've been nothing but generous to us. We'd be glad to have you visit. Something shifted in Cole's expression. A softening. A relief so profound it made Claire wonder just how alone he'd been these past 5 years. Then I'll come by tomorrow, he said. Got some wood that needs splitting for your stove, and I noticed the schoolhouse steps could use mending. You don't have to— I know, Cole interrupted gently, but I want to. That's the difference. He tipped his hat to both of them and walked away, leaving Claire standing in the churchyard with her daughter, and a future that suddenly seemed less terrifying than it had an hour ago. That night, after Rosie had fallen asleep, Claire sat at the window watching the stars. She thought about the council meeting, about how close she'd come to losing everything. And she thought about Cole Archer walking through that door, standing beside her chair like a bulwark against doubt. He'd called her desperate, but he'd made it sound like strength. He'd acknowledged her circumstances without pitying them, and he'd promised to come back tomorrow, to do work she hadn't asked for simply because he wanted to. It should have felt like charity. It should have chafed against her pride. Instead, it felt like the first truly solid ground she'd stood on in 8 months. Claire pulled Rosie closer, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, and allowed herself something she hadn't permitted in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope that came from having no other options, but the quiet kind that whispered maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and full of stars. Somewhere on a ranch 5 miles north, Cole Archer lay awake thinking about a woman with fierce eyes and a backbone of steel, and a little girl who'd somehow reminded him that his heart, though scarred, still worked. Tomorrow, he'd come back. He'd split wood and mend steps and find other excuses to be near them. And slowly, carefully, like a man approaching a wounded animal, he'd try to show them that not all promises ended in loss. That sometimes the people who came into your life when everything was broken were exactly the ones meant to help you heal. True to his word, Cole arrived the next morning just after sunrise, a wagon loaded with split wood rattling behind his horse. Claire heard him before she saw him, the sound of hoofbeats and creaking wheels pulling her from the bread dough she'd been kneading. She wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and stepped onto the small porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Cole was already unloading wood, His shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He worked with the efficient economy of movement that came from years of ranch labor, stacking the logs against the side of the building with practiced ease. "Mr. Archer," Claire called out, "you didn't need to bring so much." He looked up, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Winter comes early up here, Mrs. Maddox, and it stays late. You'll need every stick of this and more before spring. Still, I should pay you for the wood and your labor." "You can pay me by making sure Rosie gets a good education," Cole interrupted, hefting another armload. "That's payment enough." Before Claire could argue further, Rosie burst through the door, her nightgown fluttering around her ankles. "Mr. Cole, you came back! You really came back!" Cole set down the wood and caught Rosie as she launched herself at him, spinning her around in a circle that made her shriek with laughter. The sound pierced Claire's heart. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard her daughter laugh like that, pure and unguarded. "Of course I came back," Cole said, setting Rosie on her feet. "I made a promise, didn't I? And a man keeps his promises." "Papa used to say that too," Rosie said, her expression growing solemn. "He said a man's word is his bond." "Your papa was right." Cole's voice was gentle. "That's one of the most important things a man can have, his word. Money can be lost, land can be taken, but if you keep your promises, people know who you are." Claire watched them from the porch, something warm and frightening unfurling in her chest. This was dangerous territory. Rosie was already attaching herself to Cole, already starting to see him as a fixture in their lives. And what would happen when he eventually moved on? When he found a wife of his own, or simply tired of playing protector to a widow and her child? The pain would destroy Rosie, and if Claire was honest with herself, it might destroy her too. "Rosie, go inside and get dressed," Claire called out, her voice sharper than she intended. "We have lessons to do before the school term starts." Rosie's face fell, but she obeyed, trudging back inside with dragging steps. Cole straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at Claire with those too perceptive eyes. "Did I overstep?" he asked quietly. "No, I just—" Claire struggled for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "I don't want her to become too dependent, to expect things that might not last." Cole studied her for a long moment, then walked to the porch steps and sat down, gesturing for Claire to join him. After a brief hesitation, she did, careful to maintain a respectable distance between them. "You're afraid I'm going to disappoint her," Cole said. It wasn't a question. "I'm afraid she's going to get hurt. She's already lost her father. I can't watch her lose someone else she cares about." "So you'd rather keep everyone at arm's length? Never let anyone close because they might leave?" The words stung because they were true. "It's safer that way." "Is it?" Cole's voice was thoughtful rather than challenging. "Or is it just a different kind of hurt? The slow ache of loneliness instead of the sharp pain of loss?" Claire turned to look at him, really look at him. There were lines around his eyes, grooves beside his mouth that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun and holding back words. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred and calloused, working hands that knew hardship. "You've been alone for 5 years," she said softly. "You tell me which kind of hurt is easier to bear." Something flickered across Cole's face. Pain, recognition, maybe respect for her directness. "Neither one is easy, but at least loneliness is predictable. You know what you're getting. Loss." He shook his head. "Loss tears you apart in ways you can't prepare for." "Then why are you here? Why risk caring about us if you know how badly it can end?" Cole was quiet for so long Claire thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because 5 years of being safe hasn't made me happy. It's just made me numb. And when I saw Rosie crying in that store, something in me woke up. Something I thought died with Sarah." He turned to face Claire fully. "I'm not trying to replace your husband. And I'm not trying to be Rosie's father. I'm just trying to be a friend to 2 people who look like they could use one. And when you get tired of being a friend, when the novelty wears off and you realize that a widow and child come with complications you didn't sign up for, then I guess you'll have been right to be cautious." Cole stood, brushing dust from his pants. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't make promises I can't keep, Mrs. Maddox. And I promised Rosie she wasn't alone. That means I'm in this for however long you'll let me be." He returned to unloading wood, ending the conversation as definitively as if he'd closed a door. Claire sat on the steps a moment longer, her thoughts churning. Part of her wanted to send him away, to protect Rosie, and herself, from the inevitable pain of attachment. But another part, a part she'd been trying to silence since Richard died, whispered that maybe Cole Archer was exactly what they needed. The week passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Cole came each morning finding tasks that needed doing, mending the schoolhouse steps as promised, fixing a loose shutter, replacing worn boards in the floor. He worked with quiet competence, never asking for thanks or payment, simply doing what needed to be done. And slowly, despite her best efforts, Claire found her defenses crumbling. It started with small things. The way Cole always brought something when he visited. Fresh vegetables from his garden, a jar of preserves, once a book he thought Rosie might enjoy. The way he listened when Claire talked about her lesson plans, offering thoughtful suggestions from his own childhood education. The way he never presumed, never pushed, simply existed in their orbit like a steady moon. Rosie bloomed under his attention like a flower finally given water. She chattered to him constantly, showing him every rock she found, every flower she picked, every drawing she made. And Cole received each offering with the same serious attention he'd give to important ranch business, examining rocks for their unique qualities and discussing the finer points of wildflower identification. "You're good with her," Claire said one afternoon, watching Cole and Rosie build a fort out of firewood in the yard. Cole glanced up, surprise crossing his face. "She's easy to be good with. Smart as a whip, that one. You've done well raising her." "I had help. Richard was—" Claire's voice caught. She still couldn't say his name without feeling the knife twist. "He was a wonderful father." "I'm sure he was." Cole carefully balanced another log on Rosie's growing structure. "A man who carves toys for his daughter and teaches her that promises matter? That's the kind of father every child deserves." "Did you have a good father?" The question seemed to catch Cole off guard. He sat back on his heels, considering. "I had a hard father, fair, but hard. He believed in work and duty above all else. Love was something you showed through action, not words." A shadow crossed his face. "When I married Sarah, he said I was too soft with her, that I'd regret treating a wife like she was made of glass." "Did you regret it?" "Not for a single day." Cole's voice was fierce. "Sarah deserved to be cherished. She deserved to know she was loved every moment we had together. And when she died, at least I knew I'd given her that. No regrets about things left unsaid." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "Richard and I fought the morning he got sick. Something stupid about money, about whether we could afford new shoes for Rosie. He wanted to buy them. I said we should wait. We went to bed angry." She wiped at her eyes roughly. "That was the last real conversation we had. The next morning, he woke up with fever, and 2 weeks later, he was gone. So I do have regrets, Mr. Archer. I have so many regrets they could fill an ocean." Cole moved to sit beside her on the porch steps, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You think that one argument defines your marriage? That it erases all the good days, all the love, all the life you built together?" "No, but it's what I remember. When I think of our last words, that's what I hear. My voice, sharp and unkind, over something as meaningless as shoes." "Then remember something else." Cole's voice was gentle but insistent. "Remember the way he carved that horse for Rosie. Remember the jewelry box he made you. Remember that he loved you enough to marry you even when your family cut you off. Those are the things that matter, Mrs. Maddox, not one argument on one bad morning." "Claire," she heard herself say, "if we're going to be friends, you should call me Claire." Something warm flickered in Cole's eyes. "All right, Claire. And you should call me Cole, not Mr. Archer. Makes me feel like my father." A laugh bubbled up from Claire's chest, surprising them both. It felt rusty, out of practice, but real. "All right, Cole." Rosie's voice rang out from the yard. "Mama, Cole, come see. I finished the fort." They went to admire her handiwork, a precarious structure of logs that would likely collapse with the first strong wind, but represented hours of determined effort. Cole examined it with exaggerated seriousness, pointing out the strong foundation and clever use of available materials. "You've got builder's instincts," he told Rosie. "Your papa would be proud." Rosie beamed, then turned to Claire with sudden urgency. "Mama, can Cole come to the social with us tomorrow, please?" Claire's heart stuttered. The social. She'd been trying not to think about it, about walking into a room full of strangers who would judge her, about facing those cruel boys and their parents, about being on display as the new teacher and the tragic widow. "Sweetheart, Mr. Cole probably has his own plans." "Actually," Cole interrupted, "I was planning to go. Most of the town turns out for the socials. It's one of the few times we all get together." He looked at Claire, his expression carefully neutral. "I could meet you there, if you'd like. Safety and numbers and all that." Claire knew what he was really offering, his presence as protection, as a statement to the town that she and Rosie weren't alone. It should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt like rescue. "All right," she agreed. "We'd appreciate that." The next evening, Claire dressed with shaking hands. She'd washed and pressed her morning dress, still the only decent dress she owned, and braided her hair in a crown around her head. Rosie wore her Sunday dress, freshly cleaned, with her hair in ringlets that Claire had spent an hour coaxing with strips of rag. "You look beautiful, Mama," Rosie said, twirling in her own dress. "So do you, sweetheart." Claire forced a smile, trying to quiet the anxiety churning in her stomach. "Remember, we're going to be brave. We're going to hold our heads high and show everyone that we belong here." "Because Cole said we're not alone," Rosie said confidently. "We're part of Red Haven now." If only Claire could feel half as certain as her 5-year-old daughter. The church hall blazed with light and sound when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm golden light over the assembled crowd. Tables lined the walls, laden with food brought by every family in attendance. In one corner, a makeshift band tuned their instruments, a fiddle, a guitar, and someone's battered piano that had been dragged from the church sanctuary. Claire stood in the doorway with Rosie pressed against her side, suddenly paralyzed. So many people, so many eyes turning toward them, assessing, judging. "Mrs. Maddox!" Susan Hartley appeared through the crowd, her stern face softening into something almost welcoming. "You came. Good. Come meet some of the other families." Before Claire could respond, Susan had taken her arm and was propelling her into the room. The next few minutes passed in a blur of introductions. Ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, the doctor, the minister, and his rather formidable wife. Claire smiled and nodded and tried to remember names, all while keeping one eye on Rosie. Her daughter had spotted a group of girls near her age and was hovering at the edge of their circle, clearly wanting to join but afraid of rejection. Claire's heart clenched. This was Rosie's chance to make friends, to find her place in this new town. But would the other children accept her? Or would they be as cruel as those boys in the store? "The new teacher, I hear," a woman's voice said, pulling Claire's attention back. The speaker was elegantly dressed, her hair arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken hours to create. Everything about her screamed money and status. "Margaret Sutton's cousin. Such a shame about Margaret." "Yes," Claire managed. "I was devastated to arrive and learn she'd passed." "Of course you were." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And now you're stuck here, a widow alone with a child. How difficult for you." There was something in her tone that set Claire's teeth on edge, a combination of false sympathy and barely concealed disdain. "I'm fortunate that the council was willing to give me the teaching position. Red Haven has been very welcoming." "Oh, I'm sure they have been." The woman's gaze swept over Claire's worn dress, her work-roughened hands. "Though I do wonder if a woman in your position is truly suited to teaching our children. The role requires a certain moral authority." Claire felt her face flush. "I assure you, ma'am, my credentials are Louise." Cole's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He appeared at Claire's elbow, his presence solid and reassuring. "Still spreading kindness and Christian charity, I see." The woman, Louise, turned her calculating gaze on Cole, and something predatory entered her expression. "Cole Archer, what a surprise to see you at a social event. You usually avoid these gatherings like they carry plague." "I make exceptions for special occasions." Cole's voice was polite but cool. "Claire, this is Louise Hartwell. Her husband owns the bank." Louise, this is Claire Maddox, our new teacher. We were just getting acquainted, Louise said, her smile sharpening. I was explaining to Mrs. Maddox the importance of maintaining proper standards in our community. I'm sure you were. Cole's tone made it clear what he thought of Louise's standards. If you'll excuse us, I believe I promised Mrs. Maddox a tour of the hall. He offered Claire his arm, and she took it gratefully, letting him guide her away from Louise's venomous presence. Once they were out of earshot, Claire let out a shaky breath. Thank you. I thought I was going to say something I'd regret. Louise Hartwell is the town's self-appointed moral guardian, Cole said, his voice dry. She's made it her life's work to judge everyone around her and find them wanting. Best to just ignore her. She seemed quite interested in you. Cole's expression darkened. She's been trying to get her hooks into me since Sarah died. Seems to think a widower with land needs a wife to manage him. He paused. I've made it very clear I'm not interested. Before Claire could respond, a commotion near the door drew their attention. The three boys from the store had arrived, trailing their parents. Claire recognized the red-haired boy immediately, and her spine stiffened. Those are the boys who were cruel to Rosie, she said quietly. Cole followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. The tall one is Tommy Brennan. His father owns the feed store. The stocky one is Pete Morrison, the blacksmith's son. And the little mean one is Billy Hartwell. Hartwell, as in Louise's son. Yes. Cole's voice was grim. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Claire scanned the room for Rosie and found her still hovering near the group of girls who now had their mothers with them. One of the women glanced at Rosie, then deliberately turned her back, pulling her daughter closer. The message was clear. Rosie wasn't welcome. Excuse me, Claire said, starting toward her daughter, but Cole caught her arm gently. Wait, look! Another girl had broken away from the group, a little blonde thing with braids and a gap-toothed smile. She walked right up to Rosie and held out her hand. Want to see my doll? The girl asked, her voice carrying across the hall. Papa just brought her from Denver. She's got real China face and everything. Rosie's face lit up like sunrise. Really? Can I hold her? Sure, come on. The two girls ran off together, leaving the disapproving mothers and the other children behind. Claire felt tears sting her eyes. That's Emma Patterson, Cole said softly. The boarding house keeper's daughter. Good kid. Kind heart. Like her mother, I imagine. Exactly like her mother. The fiddle struck up a tune, and couples began moving toward the center of the hall for dancing. Cole shifted beside Claire, and she could feel his nervousness even before he spoke. I'm not much of a dancer, he said, but if you'd like, that is, if it wouldn't be inappropriate given your mourning. Claire looked at him. This man who'd shown up in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying, who'd defended her to the council, brought food to her door, fixed her steps and made her daughter laugh, who was now standing before her looking terrified at the prospect of asking her to dance. I'd like that, she said. Very much. Relief flooded Cole's face. He led her onto the floor just as the band transitioned into a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, large and warm, and Claire's breath caught. It had been so long since anyone had touched her like this, respectfully but intimately, the touch of a man who was aware of her as a woman. They began to move, and despite his protests about not being a good dancer, Cole was surprisingly competent. He led with quiet confidence, his steps sure even if they weren't fancy. You lied, Claire said, looking up at him. You danced just fine. Sarah taught me. A shadow crossed his face. She loved to dance. Said it was one of the few times I'd let myself relax. Did you love her very much? More than I knew how to say. Cole's voice was rough. We only had 3 years together, but they were good years. She made me laugh, made me think about things beyond the ranch. When I lost her, he trailed off, his hand tightening slightly at Claire's waist. I thought that was it, that I'd had my chance at happiness and it was gone. And now? Cole's eyes met hers, and Claire saw vulnerability there that made her chest ache. Now I'm starting to think maybe that's not how it works. Maybe we get more than one chance if we're brave enough to take it. The music swelled around them, and Claire let herself drift in the moment, the warmth of the crowded hall, the sound of laughter and conversation, the solid presence of Cole's hand guiding her through the dance. For the first time since Richard died, she felt something other than grief or fear or desperate determination to survive. She felt alive. The waltz ended, and Cole released her reluctantly. "Thank you for the dance." "Thank you for asking." Claire smoothed her skirt, suddenly self-conscious. "I should check on Rosie." "Of course." But before Claire could move away, Louise Hartwell materialized beside them, her smile bright and false. "Cole, I was hoping you'd dance with me. For old time's sake." Cole's expression shuddered. "I don't recall any old times between us, Louise." "Oh, don't be modest. We've known each other for years." Louise placed a proprietary hand on Cole's arm. "And I think it's time you rejoin society properly. Mourning is one thing, but 5 years is excessive." "Louise," Cole said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "remove your hand from my arm, or I will remove it for you." Louise's eyes widened, then narrowed with fury. "How dare you speak to me that way? I'm only trying to help you, to bring you back into polite company instead of letting you waste your attention on—" She turned her venom on Claire. "On widow women who are clearly looking for their next meal ticket." The hall had gone quiet around them. Claire felt every eye in the room turn their direction, felt the weight of judgment and speculation. Her face burned with humiliation and rage. "That's enough." Cole's voice cut through the silence like a whip. "You owe Mrs. Maddox an apology." "I will do no such thing," Louise's voice rose shrilly. "Everyone can see what she's doing, throwing herself at you, using her child to gain sympathy, manipulating." "I said enough!" The crack of command in Cole's voice made several people flinch. Claire has done nothing but try to build a life here for herself and her daughter. She didn't ask for my help. She didn't seek my attention. And she sure as hell doesn't deserve your jealous, vindictive— "Cole, stop!" Claire placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension coiled there. "It's all right." "It's not all right," Cole said, his eyes still fixed on Louise. "You don't get to talk to her that way. You don't get to make assumptions about her character or her intentions." "Why?" Louise demanded. "Why do you care so much what happens to some nobody widow from St. Louis? What is she to you?" The question hung in the air. Cole looked at Claire, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke it. "She's under my protection," he said quietly. "Her and her daughter both. Which means anyone who insults her, anyone who hurts her or causes her trouble, will answer to me. Is that clear?" The hall erupted in whispers. Claire stood frozen, torn between gratitude for Cole's defense and mortification at being the center of such a scene. This was exactly what she'd feared, becoming the subject of gossip, being seen as a charity case or worse, a scheming widow trying to trap a wealthy rancher. Louise's face had gone red with fury and embarrassment. "You'll regret this, Cole Archer. Mark my words." She swept away, her husband hurrying after her, and slowly the conversations resumed around them. Cole turned to Claire, his expression stricken. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make things worse for you." "You didn't." Claire's voice shook slightly. "But you shouldn't have spoken for me like that. Now everyone will think—" "I don't care what they think." Cole's voice was fierce. "Louise Hartwell has needed someone to stand up to her for years. I'm only sorry I did it in a way that embarrassed you." "Mama?" Rosie appeared at Claire's side, her small face worried. Emma Patterson was right behind her. "Why was that lady yelling at you?" "It's nothing, sweetheart." Claire forced a smile, pulling Rosie close. Just adult conversation that got a little heated. But Rosie wasn't fooled. She looked between Claire and Cole, her expression wise beyond her years. "She was being mean to you, like those boys were mean to me." "Yes," Claire admitted. "She was. And Cole stood up for you." Rosie's voice was matter-of-fact. "Like he stood up for me. Because we're not alone." Cole knelt down, that gesture again, always that gesture, and met Rosie's eyes. "That's right. You and your mama are not alone. Not anymore." Rosie threw her arms around Cole's neck, and Claire saw his face transform, surprise melting into something that looked almost like joy. He hugged Rosie back, one large hand cradling her small head, and Claire had to look away before the tears threatening to spill could break free. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd tried to protect them from. But as she watched Cole with her daughter, As she remembered the way it felt to be in his arms during that dance, Claire realized something terrifying. It was already too late to protect her heart. Somewhere between the general store and this moment, between split wood and fixed steps and quiet conversations on the porch, she'd let Cole Archer past every defense she'd built. And God help her, she wasn't sure she wanted him to leave. The social ended with Claire and Rosie walking home under a canopy of stars, Cole riding slowly beside them on his horse. The night air carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke, and despite the scene with Louise Hartwell, Claire felt something close to contentment settling over her shoulders like a warm shawl. "Emma invited me to come play at her house," Rosie announced, skipping between them. "Can I go, Mama? Please?" "We'll see, sweetheart. I need to meet her mother properly first." "Mrs. Patterson seemed kind," Cole offered. "Her boarding house is clean and respectable. Emma would be a good friend for Rosie." Claire glanced up at him, at the way moonlight carved shadows across his face. "Thank you for what you said tonight, even if it did cause a scene. I'm not sorry for defending you." Cole's voice was firm. "Though I am sorry if I made your position in town more difficult." "You didn't. Louise Hartwell would have found a reason to dislike me regardless." Claire paused, choosing her words carefully. "But when you said I was under your protection, people will talk, Cole. They'll assume things about our relationship. Let them talk." Cole reined his horse to a stop as they reached the schoolhouse. "I know the truth. You know the truth. That's what matters." "Is it? I'm the new teacher. I need the town's respect if I'm going to succeed here." Cole dismounted, moving to stand in front of Claire. In the moonlight, his eyes looked almost silver. "You'll earn their respect by being good at your job, not by tiptoeing around Louise Hartwell's jealousy. The people in this town worth knowing will judge you on your character, not on gossip." "And the people not worth knowing?" "They don't matter." Cole's voice softened. "Claire, I understand you're worried, but you can't live your life afraid of what small-minded people might think. Trust me, I've tried. It just makes you bitter." Rosie tugged on Claire's hand. "Mama, I'm tired. Can we go inside?" "Of course, sweetheart." Claire unlocked the door, then turned back to Cole. "Would you like to come in? I could make coffee." Something flickered across Cole's face. Hope, maybe, or surprise that she was asking. "I'd like that, thank you." Inside, Claire lit the lamps while Rosie changed into her nightgown. Cole sat at the small table, his large frame making the furniture seem even more modest than it was. But he looked comfortable, relaxed in a way Claire hadn't seen before. "This is a good space," he said, looking around. "Small, but you've made it homey." "We've done what we can." Claire filled the kettle and set it on the stove. "It's more than I dared hope for a few weeks ago." Rosie emerged in her nightgown, dragging her rag doll. She climbed onto the chair next to Cole without hesitation, leaning against his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Tell me about your ranch," she demanded. "Do you have horses, cows, chickens?" Cole's mouth quirked in that almost smile. "I have all of those things. About 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and more chickens than I can count. Plus a goat who thinks she's a dog and follows me everywhere." Rosie giggled. "A goat that thinks she's a dog? That's silly." "Tell that to Matilda. She's very serious about her job as ranch dog." Cole's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, I could use some help gathering eggs. The chickens have been laying more than I can use, and it's a shame to let them go to waste. You think you might want to visit the ranch sometime? Help me with the chickens." Rosie's eyes went wide with excitement. "Really? I could come to your ranch?" "If your mama says it's all right." Cole looked at Claire, and she saw the question there, not just about visiting the ranch, but about everything. About whether she was willing to let him deeper into their lives, to risk the attachment that was already forming. Claire poured the coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "I think that would be lovely. Rosie loves animals." "Then it's settled. How about tomorrow afternoon? I could bring the wagon, make it easier for you both." "Tomorrow's Sunday," Claire said. "We should be at church." "Then after church. I'll wait for you outside." Rosie bounced in her seat with excitement, and Claire couldn't help but smile at her daughter's joy. This was what she'd wanted, to see Rosie happy again, to see her excited about life instead of just surviving it, even if it meant risking their hearts. They talked late into the night, long after Rosie had fallen asleep curled up against Cole's side. Claire learned about his ranch, about the years of hard work building it from nothing, about his plans to expand the cattle operation. He asked about her teaching, about the curriculum she'd planned, about her hopes for the students. It was the kind of conversation Claire hadn't had since Richard died, easy and deep at the same time, ranging from the practical to the philosophical without effort. And sitting across the table from Cole, watching lamplight flicker across his weathered face, Claire felt something she'd thought was dead forever stirring back to life. Hope. Not just for survival, but for something more. Cole finally left near midnight, carefully extracting himself from Rosie's sleeping grip and laying her gently on the bed. At the door he paused, his hat in his hands. "Claire, I need you to know something." "What?" "I'm not playing at this. I'm not helping you because I feel sorry for you, or because I'm lonely, or because I need a good deed to balance some cosmic ledger." His eyes were intense in the lamplight. "I'm here because when I look at you and Rosie, something in me that's been dead for 5 years starts to feel alive again. And I know that's probably too much honesty too soon, but I wanted you to know, so you can decide what you want to do about it." Claire's breath caught. "Cole, You don't have to say anything now. Just think about it." He settled his hat on his head. "I'll see you tomorrow after church." Then he was gone, leaving Claire standing in the doorway with her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. Sunday dawned bright and clear. Claire dressed herself and Rosie in their Sunday best and walked to the white-steepled church at the end of town. The building was already full when they arrived, the morning sunlight streaming through simple glass windows to paint patterns on the worn wooden pews. Claire felt eyes on them as they entered, felt the whispers that followed in their wake. News of last night's scene with Louise Hartwell had clearly spread, but Susan Hartley waved them over to sit with her family, and the simple gesture of welcome made Claire's throat tight. The service was traditional, hymns and prayers and a sermon about forgiveness that felt pointed given last night's events. Claire tried to focus on the minister's words, but her mind kept drifting to Cole's confession, to the way he'd looked at her in the lamplight, raw and honest and terrifying in his vulnerability. What did she want? That was the question that had kept her awake most of the night. She knew what she should want: safety, stability, independence. But what she actually wanted was far more complicated and dangerous. She wanted Cole, not just as a friend or protector, but as something more. She wanted his quiet strength, his gentle humor, his steadfast presence. She wanted to see him look at Rosie with that soft expression. She wanted more nights of easy conversation over coffee. She wanted a future, not just survival, but an actual life. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like taking the first full breath after months of slowly suffocating. After the service, Claire lingered in the churchyard while Rosie ran with Emma Patterson and some other children who'd finally warmed to her. True to his word, Cole waited by the gate, his wagon hitched and ready. Louise Hartwell swept past with her nose in the air, deliberately snubbing them both. Several other families did the same, their disapproval evident. But just as many stopped to greet Claire warmly, to welcome her properly to Red Haven, to tell her they were looking forward to their children being in her classroom. "Don't mind the Hartwells," an older woman said, patting Claire's arm. "Louise has been queen bee in this town for too long. Does her good to be reminded she's not the only woman who matters." Cole helped Claire and Rosie into the wagon, and they set off toward his ranch. The road wound through open grassland dotted with wildflowers, then climbed into foothills where pine trees stood like silent sentinels. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow even in late summer. "It's beautiful," Claire breathed, taking in the vast landscape. "It's home," Cole said simply. "I came out here 15 years ago with nothing but a horse and a dream. Bought this land cheap because everyone said it was too isolated, too hard to work. But I made it work." "With Sarah?" "The last 3 years, yes. She loved it here. Used to sit on the porch every evening and watch the sunset over the mountains." His voice was wistful rather than bitter. Said it was the most beautiful place on earth. They crested a hill, and there it was, Cole's ranch. The main house was larger than Claire had expected, a solid log structure with a covered porch and stone chimney. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, corrals for the horses. Everything was well maintained, the fences straight and strong, the buildings freshly chinked. This was no struggling homestead. This was a successful ranch, built by years of hard work and careful planning. Cole, this is... Claire couldn't find the words. It's wonderful. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and for the first time since she'd met him, Cole looked almost shy. It's a lot for one person, too much really. I keep thinking I should sell it, move into town, but then I can't quite bring myself to let it go. Rosie was already scrambling down from the wagon, her eyes huge as she took in the animals in the corrals. Are those all your horses? Some are mine, some I'm training for other folks. Cole lifted Claire down, his hands strong on her waist. Want to meet them? The next hour passed in a blur of wonder as Cole showed them around the ranch. Rosie fed carrots to the horses, collected eggs from the chickens with squeals of delight, and met Matilda the goat, who did indeed think she was a dog, and tried to herd them all like sheep. But it was the house that truly captured Claire's attention. Cole showed them inside almost reluctantly, as if afraid of what she might think. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and furniture that was simple but well made. A kitchen took up one corner, equipped with a cast-iron stove that made Claire's little schoolhouse stove look like a toy. Doors led to what Cole said were 2 bedrooms and a small study. It was a home meant for a family. And walking through it, Claire could almost see the ghost of what it might have been. Children running through the rooms, a woman at that stove preparing dinner, laughter and warmth filling the empty spaces. Sarah chose most of the furniture, Cole said, running his hand along the back of a rocking chair. She had good taste. Better than mine, anyway. It's beautiful, Cole, really beautiful. He turned to face her, and Claire saw vulnerability in his expression. I keep it the way she left it. Some folks say I should change things, make it mine instead of ours. But I can't seem to do it. It feels like erasing her. Claire moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. You don't have to erase someone to move forward. Their memory can exist alongside new things, new people. Can it? Cole's voice was rough. Because sometimes I feel like I'm betraying Sarah just by wanting to be happy again. Like I'm supposed to stay frozen in that moment when I lost her. Is that what she would have wanted? The question seemed to hit Cole like a physical blow. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the rocking chair. No, Sarah would have kicked my ass for wasting 5 years being miserable. She believed in living every moment, squeezing every drop of joy out of life. A sad smile crossed his face. She used to say that grief was just love with nowhere to go, that the answer wasn't to stop loving, but to find new places to put it. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Cole looked at Claire, and something in his expression made her breath catch. And I think she'd like you. I think she'd be glad that you and Rosie found your way here. Before Claire could respond, Rosie's voice rang out from the porch. Mama, Cole, come see! Matilda's trying to eat my dress! They rushed outside to find Rosie giggling hysterically while the goat tugged determinedly at her hem. Cole shooed Matilda away with practiced ease, and Rosie threw her arms around his waist. This is the best day ever, she announced. Can we come back, please? Cole looked at Claire over Rosie's head. You're welcome any time, both of you. They stayed for dinner, a simple meal of stew that Cole had simmering on the stove and biscuits he made with surprising competence. Rosie chattered non-stop about everything she'd seen, making elaborate plans to visit every week to help with the chickens. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold, Claire stood on the porch watching the light show while Cole hitched the wagon for their return trip. Rosie had finally run out of energy and was dozing in the rocking chair, Matilda curled at her feet. She's had a good day, Claire said as Cole joined her. So have I. Cole leaned against the porch rail, his eyes on the sunset. It's been a long time since this house heard a child's laughter. I'd forgotten how good it sounds. Cole, about what you said last night. You don't have to say anything. Cole's voice was gentle. I know it's complicated. I know you're still grieving Richard, still trying to build a life here. I'm not asking you to rush into anything. What are you asking? Cole turned to face her, and in the dying light, his eyes were the color of storm clouds. I'm asking for a chance, to court you properly, to let this thing between us grow at whatever pace feels right. I'm asking you to trust me with your heart, even though I know how scary that is after losing someone you loved. Claire's eyes burned with unshed tears. I'm terrified, Cole. Terrified of caring about you and losing you. Terrified of letting Rosie get attached and having her heart broken. Terrified that I'm being selfish, wanting happiness when Richard's barely been gone a year. Love isn't selfish, Claire, and neither is moving forward. Cole reached out, his fingers ghosting along her jaw in a touch so gentle it made her want to weep. Richard would want you to be happy. Would want Rosie to grow up with joy instead of just grief. You honoring his memory doesn't mean you have to be alone forever. How do you know what I need to do? The words came out sharper than Claire intended, defensive walls rising against the truth of what he was saying. But Cole didn't flinch. Because I've been where you are. I've spent 5 years telling myself that being alone was honoring Sarah's memory, that moving on meant forgetting her. And all it did was make me half alive, going through motions without really living. He paused. Then I met you and Rosie, and suddenly I could breathe again. Suddenly there was a reason to fix up the porch, to gather extra eggs, to wake up in the morning with something that felt like hope. Cole, Claire's voice broke. I'm not asking you to forget Richard. I'm not asking you to stop grieving. I'm just asking you to let me stand beside you while you do, to let me help carry the weight until it gets easier to bear. Cole's hand dropped away from her face. And if you can't do that, if you need me to step back, I will. I'll still be your friend. I'll still keep my promise to Rosie, but I won't push for more than you're ready to give. Claire looked at this man who'd appeared in her life like an answered prayer, who'd defended her honor and fixed her steps and made her daughter laugh, who was offering her not just survival, but the possibility of happiness if she was brave enough to reach for it. Richard's voice echoed in her memory. Life's too short for fear, Claire. Take the chances that matter. She'd taken a chance on Richard once, defying her family to marry a carpenter. It had given her the best years of her life, even if they'd ended too soon. Maybe it was time to be brave again. All right, she whispered. Cole's eyes widened. All right? All right, you can court me. Properly, slowly, at whatever pace feels right. Claire took a shaky breath. But you have to understand, I come with complications. A daughter who needs stability, a teaching position I can't risk, a heart that's still healing from loss. And I can't make you any promises about where this will lead. I don't need promises. Cole's voice was rough with emotion. I just need a chance. He leaned down slowly, giving Claire plenty of time to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was chaste, respectful, nothing that would scandalize even the most proper matron, but it sent warmth flooding through Claire's body, awakening parts of her she'd thought died with Richard. When Cole pulled back, his eyes were bright. Thank you for trusting me. Don't make me regret it, Claire said, trying for lightness even as her heart pounded. I'll do my damnedest not to. They woke Rosie gently and loaded her into the wagon for the ride back to town. The little girl dozed against Claire's side, worn out from excitement and fresh air. The sky had darkened to deep purple, stars beginning to emerge like scattered diamonds. Cole? Claire said softly, not wanting to wake Rosie. Yes? What happens now? How does proper courting work in Montana territory? She heard the smile in his voice, even if she couldn't see it in the darkness. Well, I'll come by the schoolhouse regularly. We'll have dinners together, take walks, let people see us together. I'll bring flowers occasionally, though I'm not much good at romantic gestures. You brought food when we were hungry. You fixed things that were broken. You defended my honor in front of the whole town. Claire's voice was soft. I think you're better at romantic gestures than you know. Cole was quiet for a moment. Sarah used to say the same thing, that I showed love through action instead of words. I tried to get better at the words for her, but they never came easy. Actions are enough, Cole. Actions are more than enough. They rode in comfortable silence the rest of the way. When they reached the schoolhouse, Cole helped Claire carry the sleeping Rosie inside and lay her on the bed. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Thank you for today, Claire said, for sharing your home with us, for being patient with my fears. Thank you for giving me a chance. Cole's voice was earnest. I know it wasn't easy. After he left, Claire stood at the window watching his wagon disappear into the night. Her heart felt full and terrified at the same time, like she was standing on the edge of a cliff trying to decide whether to jump. But maybe that was what courage was. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to jump anyway. School started the following Monday, and Claire threw herself into teaching with fierce determination. Her classroom filled with 23 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, all with different needs and abilities. She taught reading and arithmetic, history and geography, grammar and penmanship. And slowly, grudgingly, even the most skeptical parents admitted that the new teacher knew her business. True to his word, Cole courted her properly. He came to the schoolhouse 3 or 4 times a week, always with some excuse, bringing vegetables from his garden, checking on repairs he'd made, asking her opinion on a book he'd read. They took walks after dinner while Rosie played in the yard, talking about everything and nothing. And gradually, so gradually, Claire barely noticed it happening, the weight of grief began to lift. Not disappearing, but shifting, becoming something she carried alongside hope instead of it. The town slowly accepted their courtship, though Louise Hartwell made her disapproval known at every opportunity. But most people seemed pleased that Cole Archer was finally moving on with his life, and that the new teacher had found someone to look after her. Emma Patterson became Rosie's constant companion, the two girls inseparable at school and during playtime. Emma's mother, Dorothy Patterson, became a friend to Claire, one of the few women in town who didn't seem to judge her for being a widow or for letting Cole court her. "You're good for him," Dorothy said one afternoon while the girls played in the schoolyard. "I've known Cole since he came to Red Haven. He's been like a ghost these past 5 years, here, but not really here. You've brought him back to life." "He's done the same for me," Claire admitted. "I was so focused on survival I'd forgotten there could be more than that." "Well, the whole town's watching to see when he'll propose. The betting pool at the saloon has it happening by Christmas." Claire felt her face heat. "That's absurd. We've only been courting for 2 months." "That's long enough when you're both adults who know what you want." Dorothy's smile was knowing. "And anyone with eyes can see that man is head over heels in love with you." Love. The word made Claire's heart skip. She and Cole hadn't spoken of love yet, tiptoeing around the word like it was something precious and fragile that might shatter if named too soon. But she felt it growing between them, undeniable as the seasons changing. October came with the first frost, and Cole insisted on checking the schoolhouse to make sure it was properly weatherproofed for winter. He spent a whole Saturday re-chinking gaps in the walls and checking the stove, Rosie following him around like a devoted puppy. "You're good with her," Claire said, echoing words from months ago. Cole looked up from his work, sawdust in his hair. "She makes it easy, smart as a whip, that one, and brave. She reminds me of you." "She reminds me of Richard," Claire said softly. "The way she sees the world, the questions she asks. Sometimes it hurts to look at her and see so much of him staring back." Cole set down his tools and came to sit beside Claire on the porch steps. "Does it bother you that I'm not Richard, that I can't be what he was?" "No." Claire's voice was firm. "I don't want you to be Richard. I want you to be Cole, the man who knelt in the dust beside my crying daughter, the man who defended my honor even when it cost him social standing, the man who's been nothing but patient and kind while I figured out how to open my heart again." Cole's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "I love you, Claire. I know it's soon. I know we said we'd go slow, but I need you to know. I love you. And I love Rosie, and I want you both in my life permanently." Claire's breath caught. This was it. The moment she'd been both longing for and dreading. The moment when she had to decide if she was brave enough to risk everything again. She thought of Richard, of the years they'd had together. She thought of the grief that had nearly destroyed her, the desperate journey to Red Haven, the cruel boys in Louise Hartwell's venom. And she thought of Cole kneeling in sawdust, making promises to a child he didn't know. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I do." Cole's face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her, properly this time. Not the chaste brush of lips on forehead, but a real kiss that tasted of promise and hope and second chances. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rosie's voice drifted from inside the schoolhouse. "Mama? Cole? I'm hungry. They looked at each other and laughed, the moment broken but not lost. Cole pressed his forehead to Claire's, his eyes soft. Marry me, he said. Not now, not until you're ready, but someday. Say you'll marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you and Rosie happy. Claire's heart was so full she thought it might burst. Ask me again at Christmas. If you still feel the same way then, I'll say yes. Cole's smile was brilliant. I'll still feel the same way. I'll feel the same way 50 years from now. Then you have yourself a deal, Cowboy. The weeks between October and Christmas stretched like a sweet ache, filled with the kind of anticipation that made every ordinary moment feel significant. Claire taught her students while counting down the days, watching Cole's eyes follow her across the churchyard on Sundays, feeling the weight of his unspoken question hanging between them like something precious waiting to be unwrapped. November brought the first real snow, transforming Red Haven into something from a fairy tale. Claire woke one morning to find the world outside her window blanketed in white, and Rosie's squeal of delight pulled her from bed faster than any alarm could have. Mama, Mama, look, it snowed, real snow. They bundled up in every warm thing they owned and ventured out into the transformed landscape. The schoolyard had become a winter wonderland, and within an hour, half the town's children had converged there for an impromptu snow battle that left everyone soaked and laughing. Cole arrived mid-morning with his wagon, ostensibly to check that the schoolhouse stove was working properly in the cold. But Claire saw through the excuse. She saw it in the way his eyes sought hers immediately, in the soft smile that crossed his face when he found Rosie building a lopsided snowman with Emma Patterson. The stove's working fine, Claire said, meeting him at the door with snow in her hair and pink cheeks from the cold. Good to know. Cole's eyes sparkled with mischief. Though I should probably check it thoroughly. Safety first. Of course. Safety first. Claire bit back a smile. Would you like some coffee while you conduct your very thorough safety inspection? That would be appreciated, ma'am. They fell into the easy rhythm they'd developed over the past months, moving around each other in the small space like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. Cole did actually check the stove because that's who he was, a man who followed through even on pretense. But mostly they talked, sharing the small details of their days that somehow felt monumental when shared with the right person. The cattle are ready for winter, Cole said, warming his hands on the coffee cup. Got enough hay stored to last through even a hard season. Fixed the barn roof where it was leaking. Matilda tried to eat my hat yesterday. Claire laughed, the sound coming easier now than it had in months. That goat is a menace. She's lonely, keeps looking for Rosie whenever I'm doing chores. Cole's expression grew thoughtful. Actually, the whole ranch feels lonely without you two there. It's funny how quickly a place can go from feeling empty to feeling wrong without certain people in it. The weight of his words settled over Claire like a warm blanket. Cole, I know, Christmas. I promised I'd wait until Christmas to ask again. He set down his coffee cup and reached for her hand. But that doesn't stop me from thinking about it every day. From imagining what it would be like to wake up with you beside me, to watch Rosie grow up in that house, to fill all those empty rooms with life and laughter. Claire's throat tightened. I think about it too. More than I probably should. Why shouldn't you? Because I'm scared, Claire admitted. Scared that I'm moving too fast, that I'm dishonoring Richard's memory, that I'm being selfish, wanting happiness when he's barely been gone a year. Cole pulled her closer, his hands warm on her arms. Claire, look at me. When she did, his eyes were fierce with conviction. You loved Richard. That love doesn't disappear just because you're ready to love someone else. The heart doesn't work that way. It doesn't run out of room. It just grows bigger. How did you get so wise about love? 5 years of getting it wrong taught me a lot about getting it right. Cole brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture achingly tender. I wasted so much time thinking that loving Sarah meant I couldn't love anyone else, that moving forward meant leaving her behind. But that's not how it works. She's part of who I am, part of what made me the man standing here with you, and Richard's part of who you are. That doesn't change just because we're choosing to build something new together. Before Claire could respond, the door burst open and Rosie tumbled in, covered head to toe in snow and grinning like she'd discovered buried treasure. Mama, Cole, you have to come see. We built a snow fort and it's big enough for 3 whole people, and Emma says her mama will make hot chocolate if we come to the boarding house. Claire and Cole exchanged amused glances. I think we've been summoned, Claire said. They spent the afternoon at the Patterson boarding house, a sprawling building that somehow managed to feel cozy despite its size. Dorothy Patterson proved to be as warm as her hot chocolate, insisting they all stay for an early supper. The dining room filled with boarders and townspeople seeking refuge from the cold, and Claire found herself in the middle of genuine community for the first time since arriving in Red Haven. This was what she'd hoped for when she'd set out from St. Louis. Not just a job and a roof over her head, but a place to belong. A place where Rosie could grow up surrounded by good people, where they could put down roots deep enough to weather any storm. And sitting beside Cole at the long dining table, watching him patiently help Rosie cut her meat while carrying on 3 different conversations with the people around them, Claire felt something shift inside her. The last piece of fear crumbling away, leaving only certainty in its wake. She didn't need to wait until Christmas to know her answer. The thought stayed with her through the rest of November and into December. The town began preparing for Christmas with enthusiastic determination. Decorations appearing in shop windows, plans being made for a Christmas Eve service, and celebration in the church hall. Claire threw herself into helping her students prepare a Christmas pageant, grateful for the distraction from her racing thoughts. But Cole was there, always there, steady as the mountains on the horizon. He came to the schoolhouse to help build sets for the pageant. He brought wood without being asked as the temperatures dropped. He showed up at Sunday services and walked Claire and Rosie home afterward, their breath pluming in the cold air while Rosie chattered about everything and nothing. And every time Claire looked at him, every time she saw him kneel down to listen to Rosie with that focused attention, every time his hand found hers in the darkness between street lamps, she felt more certain. She was going to say yes. Not at Christmas like she'd promised, but now, as soon as she could find the right moment. The moment came on a Sunday afternoon in mid-December. Cole had invited them to the ranch for the day, and they'd spent the morning helping him with chores. Rosie had appointed herself chief egg collector, taking her duties with solemn seriousness that made both adults hide smiles. Now the little girl was napping on the sofa in front of the fireplace, worn out from playing in the snow with Matilda. Claire stood at the kitchen window washing dishes, watching snow fall in fat, lazy flakes. Behind her, Cole was putting together sandwiches for when Rosie woke up, humming softly to himself. It was so domestic, so comfortable, so completely right that Claire felt her eyes sting with tears. Cole? He looked up from slicing bread, a question in his eyes. Ask me again. Cole went very still. What? Ask me again, what you asked in October. Claire's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. I'm ready to answer. The bread knife clattered to the counter. Cole crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, his eyes searching her face. Claire, are you sure? I can wait until Christmas like we agreed. I don't want to rush you. I'm sure. Claire's voice was steady despite her shaking hands. I've been sure for weeks. I just needed to stop being afraid long enough to admit it. Cole's hands came up to frame her face, and Claire saw everything she needed to know written in his expression. Love and hope and a devotion so fierce it took her breath away. Claire Maddox, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and Rosie, protecting you both, building a home and a family with you? Will you trust me with your heart, even though I know how much courage that takes? Yes, Claire whispered. Yes to all of it. Yes to building a life together. Yes to trusting you. Yes to taking this terrifying, beautiful leap of faith. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they were good tears. Yes, Cole, I'll marry you. For a moment, Cole just stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. Then he was kissing her, deep and thorough and full of promise. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and Claire melted into him, into this moment, into the future they were choosing together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole pressed his forehead to hers. I have something for you. I've been carrying it around for weeks, hoping you'd say yes before Christmas. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, Not elaborate or expensive, but perfect. A simple gold band with a single small diamond that caught the firelight and threw tiny rainbows across the walls. It was my mother's, Cole said softly. The only thing I have left from her. She wore it for 43 years, through good times and hard times, and she never took it off. He lifted the ring from the box with trembling fingers. I was saving it for someone special. For someone who would understand what it means to promise forever and actually mean it. Claire held out her hand, and Cole slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all this time for her to come along and claim it. It's beautiful, Claire breathed. So are you. Cole raised her hand to his lips, kissing the ring. When should we tell Rosie? As if summoned by her name, Rosie's sleepy voice drifted from the living room. Tell Rosie what? Claire and Cole exchanged glances, then moved together to the sofa where Rosie was sitting up, rubbing her eyes. Cole knelt down, that gesture that had started everything, and took one of Rosie's small hands in his. Rosie, I asked your mama to marry me, and she said yes. His voice was gentle, careful. That means we're going to be a family. I'll move in with you, or you'll move to the ranch, or we'll figure something out together. But either way, I'm going to be there every day. Is that all right with you? Rosie's eyes went wide, flicking between Cole and Claire. For a moment, Claire's heart stuttered with fear. What if Rosie said no? What if this was too much, too fast? What if... Then Rosie launched herself at Cole with a squeal that probably scared the chickens out in the coop. Really, 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 you're going to be my papa. Cole caught her, his arms coming around the little girl with fierce protectiveness. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. If you'll have me, I can't replace your real papa, and I won't try. But I can love you like my own daughter. I can be there for you, protect you, help your mama raise you into the amazing person I know you're going to be. Can I call you Papa? Rosie pulled back to look at him, her face serious. My first papa would want me to have someone to call Papa, I think. And I love you. I've loved you since you knelt down in that store and said I wasn't alone. Claire's tears were falling freely now, impossible to stop. Cole's eyes were suspiciously bright as he nodded. I would be honored if you called me Papa. Rosie threw her arms around his neck again, and Cole looked up at Claire over her daughter's shoulder. The expression on his face was everything, love and gratitude and wonder that this was really happening. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. They'd marry on Christmas Eve, during the town celebration. It would be small and simple, just the minister and whoever wanted to attend. Then they'd move to the ranch. There was no question about that. The schoolhouse would go to the next teacher, and Claire would make the daily journey into town for her classes. The bedroom at the end of the hall will be perfect for Rosie, Cole said, sketching out the layout of the ranch house on a piece of paper. It gets morning sun, and there's room for a desk where she can do her schoolwork. We can paint it any color she wants. Pink, Rosie announced immediately, with yellow flowers. Pink with yellow flowers it is. Cole made a note, completely serious about this discussion with a 5-year-old about interior decorating. And your mama and I will take the master bedroom. There's a small room next to it that would make a good study for her lesson planning. Or a nursery, Rosie said, with the matter-of-fact tone only children could manage. For when I get a baby brother or sister. Claire felt her face heat, but Cole just smiled. Maybe someday if your mama wants more children, but there's no rush. We've got all the time in the world. The announcement of their engagement spread through Red Haven like wildfire. By Monday morning, the entire town knew that Cole Archer had proposed to the new school teacher, and she'd said yes. The reactions were mixed. Most people were genuinely happy, thrilled to see Cole moving on with his life, and pleased that the widow teacher had found someone to care for her. But Louise Hartwell's circle of friends made their disapproval known with pointed comments and cold shoulders. Claire refused to let it bother her. She had Cole, she had Rosie, and she had a future that looked brighter than anything she'd dared dream of 6 months ago when she'd arrived in Red Haven with nothing but desperation and $17. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of preparation. Dorothy Patterson insisted on helping Claire make a dress for the wedding. Nothing elaborate, just a simple gown in deep blue velvet that made Claire's eyes look like sapphires. Susan Hartley arranged for the church to be decorated with pine boughs and candles. Cole ordered a gold ring from the jeweler to match Claire's engagement ring, pacing the schoolhouse like a nervous colt until it arrived. Rosie appointed herself wedding planner, taking her duties with adorable seriousness. She made lists of who should sit where, what flowers should be in the church, what food should be served at the celebration afterward. Cole indulged her every whim, and Claire watched the two of them together with a heart so full it ached. On Christmas Eve, Claire woke before dawn, too nervous and excited to sleep. She lay in bed watching the first light creep across the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Richard's death, the desperate journey west, the cruel boys in the general store, and a cowboy who'd knelt in the dust and promised her daughter she wasn't alone. "I hope you're watching, Richard," she whispered into the quiet room. "I hope you approve. I hope you know I'll never forget you, never stop loving what we had. But I'm ready to love again. I'm ready to live again." She felt no answer, no sign, but somehow Claire knew it was all right. Richard had loved her enough to want her happiness, even if it came with someone else. The day passed in a haze of final preparations. Dorothy came to help Claire dress, fixing her hair in an elegant twist and fastening a simple necklace around her throat, something borrowed, she said, smiling. Susan arrived with Rosie, who looked like a tiny princess in a new pink dress that Cole had secretly commissioned from the dressmaker. "You look beautiful, Mama," Rosie breathed, her eyes wide. "So do you, sweetheart." Claire knelt down, careful not to wrinkle her dress, and took her daughter's hands. "Are you sure about this? About all of it? Because if you have any doubts, any worries, we can wait. Cole would understand." Rosie's expression was wise beyond her years. "Mama, I'm sure. Cole makes you happy. He makes me happy. And Papa would want us to be happy." She squeezed Claire's hands. "We're not forgetting Papa. We're just making room for more love. That's what you always say, right? The heart doesn't run out of room?" Claire's tears threatened to ruin the light powder Dorothy had applied to her cheeks. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned from the best teacher in Montana Territory." Rosie's grin was impish. The church was packed when they arrived, every pew filled with townspeople who'd come to witness Cole Archer finally moving on with his life. Candles flickered in the windows, and pine boughs filled the air with their sharp, clean scent. The minister stood at the altar, his weathered face creased in a genuine smile. And there, at the front of the church, stood Cole. He wore his Sunday best, a dark suit that Claire had never seen before, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished to a shine. But it was his face that stopped her heart. The way his eyes found hers across the crowded church, the way his expression transformed from nervous anticipation to pure, undiluted joy. This was really happening. She was really going to marry this man, really going to build a life with him, really going to take this leap of faith into an unknown future. Dorothy squeezed her arm. "Ready?" Claire took a deep breath, then took Rosie's hand. "Ready." They walked down the aisle together, Claire, Rosie, and Dorothy, three women who'd found friendship and family in the most unexpected of places. Whispers followed them, but Claire ignored them all, her eyes locked on Cole's face. When they reached the altar, Cole knelt down one more time, meeting Rosie at eye level. "Thank you for trusting me with your mama, and with you. I promise I'll do my best to make you both happy." Rosie threw her arms around his neck, and half the church dabbed at their eyes. Then Cole stood and took Claire's hands in his, and the minister began the ceremony. The words washed over Claire like a benediction, promises about love and honor, about sickness and health, about all the days of their lives. And when the minister asked if she took Cole to be her husband, Claire's voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." Cole's hands tightened on hers when it was his turn. "I do. God help me. I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The minister's smile was broad. "Cole, you may kiss your bride." Cole's hands came up to frame Claire's face, gentle and reverent, and he kissed her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of such moments. The church erupted in applause, and when they broke apart, Claire saw tears streaming down Cole's face. "I love you," he whispered, just for her. "I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Claire whispered back. "Thank you for kneeling in the dust beside my daughter. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for teaching me that the heart always has room for more love." They turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, and Rosie squeezed between them, taking both their hands. The three of them walked back down that aisle together, and Claire felt Richard's presence like a blessing rather than a ghost. He was part of her past, part of what made her who she was. But Cole was her future, and that was all right. It was more than all right. It was exactly how it was supposed to be. The celebration in the church hall lasted long into the night. There was food and music and dancing, and for once even Louise Hartwell kept her disapproval to herself, cowed perhaps by the sheer joy radiating from the newlyweds. Cole danced with Claire until her feet hurt, then danced with Rosie, spinning her around until she shrieked with laughter. As midnight approached, they finally made their escape, climbing into Cole's wagon for the journey to the ranch. Rosie was already asleep between them, worn out from excitement. The snow had stopped, and the moon hung huge and bright over the mountains, turning everything silver. "Mrs. Archer," Cole said softly, trying out the name. "Mrs. Archer?" Claire repeated, tasting the words. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Cole's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Welcome home, Claire." And looking at the ranch house rising out of the moonlit landscape, warm light glowing in the windows from the fire Cole had left burning, Claire realized he was right. She was home. Not just in a place, but with these people. With this man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up. With this daughter who'd survived loss and found joy again. With this community that had taken them in and given them a place to belong. 5 years later, Claire stood on that same porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. So much had changed since that first Christmas as Mrs. Archer. The ranch had prospered, the cattle operation expanding until Cole had to hire 2 ranch hands to help manage it all. Rosie had grown into a confident 10-year-old who could ride as well as any ranch hand and still maintained her position as chief egg collector, now with 2 younger siblings as her assistants. 3-year-old James, named for Richard James Maddox, a tribute that had made Claire weep when Cole suggested it, was currently trying to convince Matilda to pull him in a wagon. The goat was having none of it, but James's determination was legendary. And in Claire's arms, baby Sarah dozed contentedly, named for the woman whose memory had blessed this family rather than haunting it. Cole had suggested the name with tears in his eyes, and Claire had agreed immediately. It felt right, bringing these 2 parts of their lives together. The school term had ended for the summer, and Claire's students had presented her with a bouquet of wildflowers and a card signed by every family in Red Haven. Even Louise Hartwell's signature was there, though Claire suspected it had been added grudgingly. She heard Cole's boots on the porch steps and turned to find him climbing up from the barn, sawdust in his hair from fixing a stall door. He'd aged well. A few more lines around his eyes, some silver threading through his dark hair, but the core of him remained unchanged. Still steady, still kind, still the man who'd knelt beside a crying child and changed 3 lives forever. "Hey there, beautiful," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and peering over her shoulder at baby Sarah. "How's our littlest?" "Sleeping like an angel, unlike her brother, who's currently terrorizing the goat." Cole chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest into Claire's back. "That boy's going to be the death of me. He's got your stubborn streak." "My stubborn streak?" Claire turned in his arms to face him. "I seem to recall a certain cowboy who insisted on courting a widow despite half the town telling him it was too soon." "Best decision I ever made." Cole's voice was soft. "Well, second best. Best decision was kneeling down in that store 5 years ago." Claire reached up to brush sawdust from his hair. "Do you ever regret it? Taking on a ready-made family, all the complications that came with me and Rosie?" "Not for a single second." Cole's voice was fierce. "You and Rosie and James and Sarah, you're the best things that ever happened to me. You brought this house back to life, Claire. You brought me back to life." "We brought each other back to life," Claire corrected. "I was barely surviving before you showed up. You taught me that it's all right to live again, to want things, to love again." From the yard, Rosie's voice rang out. "Mama, Papa, come quick. James finally got Matilda to pull the wagon." They looked at each other and laughed, that easy laughter that came from years of shared jokes and mutual understanding. Cole took baby Sarah from Claire's arms, cradling his daughter with practiced ease, and they walked down into the yard together. The family had gathered around James's triumph, Rosie cheering, James grinning with pride, Matilda looking supremely unbothered by the small wagon she was now pulling. It was chaotic and loud and messy, and it was absolutely perfect. This was the life Claire had rebuilt from ashes. Not the life she'd planned, not the life she'd had with Richard, but a good life nonetheless. A life full of love and laughter and second chances. Cole's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far we've come. About that day in the general store when you knelt beside Rosie and told her she wasn't alone." Claire squeezed his hand. "About how one moment of kindness changed everything." "It wasn't just kindness," Cole said softly. "It was fate, or destiny, or God's plan. Whatever you want to call it. You and Rosie were meant to find your way here, and I was meant to find you." Claire looked at her family, her husband, her children, her home, and felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Richard would always be part of her, part of Rosie, part of their story. But Cole was here, solid and real and devoted, and that was more than enough. It was everything. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning into Cole's warmth. "For what?" "For kneeling in the dust, for making promises and keeping them, for loving us when we needed it most." Claire's voice was thick with emotion. "For being exactly who you are." Cole pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me with your heart, for giving me a second chance at happiness." Rosie ran up to them, breathless and grinning. "Papa, James says he wants to ride Matilda next. I told him goats aren't for riding, but he won't listen to me." "That's because your brother has his mama's stubborn streak," Cole said with a wink at Claire. "Come on, let's go explain to James why we don't ride goats." As they walked toward their son together, Rosie slipping her hand into Cole's free one, Claire felt the last piece of grief and fear finally release its hold on her heart. She'd been afraid that loving again meant betraying Richard's memory, that moving forward meant leaving him behind. But she understood now. Love didn't work that way. The heart didn't trade one love for another. It expanded, making room for all the people who shaped your life. Richard would always be Rosie's first father, would always be the man Claire had loved enough to defy her family for. And Cole was the man who'd knelt beside her crying daughter and promised she wasn't alone, who'd kept that promise every day since. Both loves were real, both loves mattered, and that was all right. The sun finally slipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and indigo. Stars began to emerge scattered across the vast Montana sky like promises of tomorrow. Inside the ranch house, lamps glowed warm and welcoming. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied their evening songs. This was home. This was family. This was the life that had grown from one cowboy's kindness and one widow's courage. And it was more than Claire had ever dreamed possible. Cole stood beside her on the porch after the children were finally in bed, his arm around her waist, both of them reluctant to end this perfect day. "What are you thinking now?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. Claire leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I'm thinking about the day we met, about how broken I was, how scared, about how you changed everything with one simple gesture." Kneeling beside Rosie wasn't simple. It was the easiest and hardest thing I'd ever done. Cole's voice was thoughtful. Easy because it felt right, like I'd been waiting my whole life to make that promise. Hard because I knew what I was signing up for, the risk of caring, the possibility of loss, all the complicated messiness of loving people. "And now, any regrets?" Cole turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face the way he'd done on their wedding day. "My only regret is that I didn't meet you sooner, that we didn't have more years together. But I'll take what we have, today, tomorrow, and all the days after, and I'll be grateful for every single one." Claire's eyes stung with happy tears. "I love you, Cole Archer." "I love you too, Claire Archer." He kissed her softly, tenderly, with all the devotion of 5 years of marriage and a lifetime of promise still ahead. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for choosing this life with me. Thank you for giving me something worth saying yes to." They stood together on the porch under the stars, Two people who'd found each other in the midst of grief and built something beautiful from the broken pieces. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, they had this: the quiet peace of a family safe and loved, a home filled with laughter and hope. And it all started with a cowboy who knelt in the dust and told a crying child she wasn't alone. She never was again.